what I'm trying to do is to bring together several disciplines, psychoneuroimmunology that studies how thoughts and emotions affect the immune, nervous, and endocrine system, anthropology, cultural anthropology, cultural neurology, and neuroscience, to then be able to explain and confirm the non-duality science, but more importantly, to be able to then apply it to your life, apply it to relationships, to health, longevity. So, as Marisa was saying, the way that I look at this, based on the work that I've done with centenarians, people who are, well, I guess I don't have to stand behind that, people who are 100 or over but are healthy all over the world, because I want to know what actually works in longevity. And as a neuropsychologist, I was expecting to find that genes really are the factor that keep you alive for a long time. So after studying over 350 centenarians all over the world, I found that only about 20% has to do with, let me see if the feedback's less here, has to do with genetics, and the rest is what I call biosymbolic. And if you talk about, especially with reductionist scientists, if you say, how can a thought affect your immune system? That's ridiculous. This is a biological process, and a thought is just a cognition. Well, if you think at it that way, then of course it's ridiculous. But if you look at the developmental process that we have as human beings, we are designed, not programmed because we're not machines, we're designed to pay attention to what I call cultural editors. And these are the people that care for us early in life, and these are the people that the culture gives them power in a context. Parents at home, a doctor in a clinic, clergy in a temple or church, and so forth. So we're designed for that. So we're born, and we're hungry, and at the moment that we're hungry, we have a physiology. We have the immune system doing something, the nervous system doing something, the endocrine system doing something, and it feels uncomfortable. Then we see a breast, and we see a bottle, and then we satiate that need, and there's also a physiology. There's endorphins and other things start happening. So you have one state, and you have another situation here, and you don't have a language. You don't know what that is. You don't even have the ability to create language. Later, you find out that's a breast, that's a bottle, that's mother. But once you give it a label, you already have a physiology. So it becomes a biosymbol. And those biosymbols are really powerful in a good and in a bad way. Because if you have a doctor that says you have 6 weeks to live, that's a nocebo effect, and a lot of power. In fact, there was one case that was reported in a psychiatric journal where this man was in a Catholic hospital. So you see the culture, Catholic hospital. And the priest comes and gives him the last rites, and he dies within 15 minutes. The slight problem was that the priest went to the wrong room. So he died of nocebo. The Vegas said, okay, stop. Why? Because implicitly, this person thinks, all right, the doctor thinks, here's a culture editor, that there's something terminal here, and then a priest comes to take me to the next step, so therefore, okay, I can die. The person that was scheduled to die waited 2 days before the priest came and gave him the last rites. So you see the power of good and bad. And that could be applied and it could be used. But I think that as Homo sapiens, we've been around as modern Homo sapiens for about 100, 150,000 years. And that's when we started burying our dead. And that's when consciousness began to really not emerge, but co-emerge. We gave value to the people that we loved, and we didn't want them to rot. Now, Darwinians, which I really envy the faith that they have, will say, well, if you bury them, it's because of sanitation. So you can go ahead and pass on the genes. If you don't bury them, it's because you want them to rot and you need to move somewhere else so that your gene expression would be a lot easier to do. So it's a posteriori kind of thing. No matter what, it's gene expression and gene passing on. And definitely there's some of that. But meaning is a lot more. Sometimes people will die to save an elderly person who's not going to pass any genes, but there's a meaning there. And that's what's so important, the meaning of what we do. And we are designed also for compassion and for cooperation. Pennebaker has done a lot of work with what he calls precursors of empathy. And children newborns that are just a few hours old, a few days old, they have very little culture, so there's a biology there. They are shown some toys fighting each other and some toys cooperating with each other, and consistently find that the newborns will pay more attention to the cooperative than to the destructive kinds of things, very early, without any cognition. Also, if a newborn hears another newborn crying, they cry. So they thought, well, this must be imitation. So they taped the other child crying, the newborn didn't cry. They taped the newborn's own crying, and they didn't cry. So it's really a compassionate kind of thing. So for example, the cell phone users, I have one of course, but you've heard about the mirror neurons, and those are the neurons that we see things out there and we imitate them as a way to create empathy. Well, some studies have been done that if you look at somebody and you smile at that person and you have eye contact, you will have oxytocin released. And oxytocins are great anti-inflammatories, heart regulators, but if you are talking to somebody on the phone, there's no oxytocin. If you see somebody on your phone, there's no oxytocin. So you can't trick the brain into the Apple move and so forth. So those are really important things to consider, because as you learn that and you realize that you're not just some kind of a machine that ages, and part of that is because in order to legitimize biology, we had to borrow a model from physics. And the physics entropy is like you go from order to disorder. And that works with open systems. But we're closed systems, which means that we, independent of what's going on out there, your liver is organizing and recreating itself every some weeks. In a year and a half, 99% of you is a new you. The only thing that stays together is the neurons to keep the identity. So we have that. And in order to really understand how we are as closed systems, as sentient beings, complexity theory gives us a better way of looking at it, which is that it goes from simple to complex. So as we grow older, we become more complex rather than more deteriorating. And to a certain degree, well, we have no choice in growing older. That's it. We have a choice in how we grow older, because growing older is a passing of time. Aging is what we do with time based on the cultural beliefs that we assimilate. So examples, Ellen Langer at Harvard, a colleague, has done quite a bit of research on the context and how you age. And she's looked at people that look significantly younger than their age and people that look significantly older. And the marker, when she was able to control for everything else, is that the people that look younger believe that middle age starts 15 years later, 10 to 15 years later. So I would suggest that you start believing that it starts at 90. So you can trick the system, and there's a marker there. And so the cultural portals, I call them, and this is totally cultural. You're the newborn, the child, the adolescent, the young adult, the middle age, which is really important and shaping you in the wrong way. And then, of course, the elderly. But these are mostly cultural. So if you're 40, let's say 45 is middle age. It's 90, but well, let's say it's 45. So the day before you're 45, you're not middle age, and you step into middle age. You begin to look middle age, you begin to act middle age, you begin to get sick like the middle age. And if you try to get out of that portal, they'll bring you back in. The culture, the pale, will bring you back in, and they'll say, oh, well, you want to look like a teenager? Well, no, I want to go back to school. No, you have to be thinking about retirement. So those are the kind of things, and after a while, you acquiesce, and you give in, and you become middle-aged. If you want to retire, it depends on where. In Turkey, 45. In Australia, 70. You should never retire into nothingness. Watching the sunset in Puerto Vallarta is not meaningful. It has to have meaning. If you retire without meaning, you live 4 to 5 years after you retire, or you get sick after you retire. Why? Because the brain was made to be creative. This is why you can trick the brain into most animals, most species, especially the female, will die after the reproductive years, with the exception of course, Homo sapiens and killer whales, because it's called the grandmother effect. Killer whales, after they can't reproduce anymore, they guide the youth into places where they can have food and changes in climate and so forth, so they continue to be productive. So what that says is that you don't have to produce children. You can produce ideas, you can produce service, you can produce something creatively, and that is the indicator of the good immunological processes. It's set up for that, but not only just for the Darwinian passing on of other species. So then what I'm proposing is that we have the culture has tremendous power over us, like what I call the fishbowl effect. You're in the fishbowl and you don't know it. But in order to get out of that, you have to become an outlier. You have to go beyond the pale. You notice that beyond the pale has a negative connotation? Well, it shouldn't. You have to be abnormal in statistical sense. If you're normal, then you're going to be within the pale and you're going to go through all the I mean, look at people when they retire and they don't do anything else. It's like they've gone to makeup in Hollywood and they make them up and they start looking old and they start acting old. There was a study that I talked about in the workshop that I did yesterday that had people come in and they would video them. And, you know, elderly, and that's a portal, not biology, they walk with a wide gait to compensate for some occipital kinds of problems. It's very easy to get rid of that. You bring your foot up like this, you close your eyes, how long you can keep it, and it gets your cerebellum and it gets also your visual cortex back to normal. So anyway, they video these people and they were walking normal, and then they put them into a study where for 15 minutes they had to write about negative things about aging. As you grow older, you get closer to death. Growing older is a deteriorating process. They video those people, and although they were young, they were walking slower and with a wider gait. So that's a shaping by cultural beliefs. They asked children in 4th and 5th grade, how does a 50-year-old look? And they go, oh, like this. So you see they're programmed already to a 50-year-old. A 50-year-old now is a 30-year-old. So, so then what do centenarians do if it's not genetics? Well, they have rituals. And I'll give you some of the causes of health which are inherited. We inherit the causes of health, but we have to trigger them. They don't come automatically. And we learn longevity culturally. It's not inherited. 20% only. I interviewed a Zen master who was 107, and I asked him, when did your parents die? Because I'd like to get that correlation, genetic correlation. And he gave me a Zen answer. He said, my parents die when I die. So I said, okay. So I went over to his assistant. You know, it's a Zen thing, so it takes a... I asked his assistant, I said, now when did they die? And he said, well, the father at 70 and the mother at 75. So much for genes. Genes are good, and if you have longevity in the family, it's great, but don't rely on that. Create your own longevity by the things that I'm going to be talking about. What I'll do is, I think it's at 11 to 12:30, I'm doing something to give you applications of what I'm talking about here. So if you're interested, how to apply for chronic pain, for fibromyalgia, which is really, it's a sexy illness now. You don't want to have tuberculosis, you want to have fibromyalgia. And it's overdiagnosed, by the way, and it's not an autoimmune illness, although it appears to be. But it can be cured. There are two camps. One says it doesn't exist, and the other one says it exists and you have to live with it for the rest of your life. They're both wrong. It exists, and you don't have to live with it for more than 6 to 8 weeks by doing the treatment without medication. So then, if you look at the rituals, though that is one of the causes of health. Every centenarian that I investigated had a ritual. Not a routine. Routine is like taking a shower so you smell good. A ritual is something that has an identification with you and your culture. So I went to Cuba. They have quite a few centenarians there. And I interviewed this lady and I asked her, so what do you, instead of biasing it, I was doing a kind of ethnographic kind of thing. I said, what do you do on a regular basis that has meaning for you? It's another way of saying, do you have a ritual? And she said, oh yes, I have a shot of rum before I go to sleep. And I thought, oh, it's got to be the Cuban Bacardi or the Cuban rum. And then I went to another one, and he said, I have a cigar. Oh, it must be the Cuban. It's the ritual. They all have rituals. So I would suggest that one of the causes of health you can start is create a ritual, elevate it to a level where you can actually have a devotional component to it, that it's important. And you will see how things begin to change to a certain degree. The other thing about the causes of health is that for these 150,000 years, we've been refining the system. The immune system is much more sophisticated now than it was a million years ago. There were no T cells a million years ago. Now we have T cells. So you don't want to live back in the caves. You don't want to go back to nature because you lived 31 years in those days. And there was no sanitary paper or toothbrushes and paste, so you were not as attractive. Although in those days, that was attractive. So, so you see how I get a little Darwinian too sometimes? So anyway, so we've been defining our tools. And in these 150,000 years, it's contextual. The best tool to be around children is the archetype of the father or the mother. That's the best. A hammer, a nail, a hammer, not a screwdriver. To be a lover, you want to be a lover, you don't want to be a father, you don't want to be a mother, you don't want to be a teacher, you want to be a lover. A father and a child, you don't want to be a lover with a child. Biology has something against that, it doesn't work. And if you're out of your archetype too much, you begin to break down, just as if you're trying to hammer something with a handle of a screwdriver. So find out, what is my archetype? My archetype that I had to change was the healer, the teacher, and my kids didn't want a healer or a teacher, they wanted a father. So I was working at this neuropsychiatric hospital, and as I was leaving, I had a 30-minute drive. I would turn on the car, you got a sensory input, and the sound of the engine would say, okay, from healer, teacher to father. So within those 30 minutes, I was preparing myself for fatherhood. When I got there, they had a father, not a doctor or anything else like that. So it's good to be able to look at that. And we all do it. We all overdo these. You have a partner, and your partner doesn't need a lecturer, and they need a partner. So, so be aware of that. So what you want is a partner who will ground you. That's what I do. I work with some Fortune 100 companies, and the CEOs, of course, they're in the visionary, and then they don't need a visionary with a husband or wife or partner. So I tell their partner to be the grounding gear for that person. When they get out of the archetype, remind them, you're being a teacher now, and I want you to be my partner. And gradually what we'll do is you'll start going back into what we learned those 150,000 years ago, and gradually you find that your health, your energy begins to get better. It's not magical, it's a process. There was one CEO in Philippines that I worked with, and just doing that helped them tremendously in dealing with some kinds of problems that it was physical problems, and the company they were thinking that, well, we're third world, and changing archetypes and doing these things, they became #1 in Asia Pacific and beat Singapore and other places that were much more sophisticated in that sense. So that's another cause of health, looking at your archetypes. Another cause of health, which is really important in our cultures, and our cultures teach us that you don't value the individual that much, even though we have an individualist culture. You go to a restaurant, you go alone and say, just one? Yeah. How many do you need? And then they say, no problem. Were you expecting a problem? So you see, it's that kind of thing. So, but also they reinforce a passport of illness. You want to take time for yourself, and you say, okay, I'm going to stay home, and I'm going to meditate, take a hot bath, and all the wonderful things. And a friend calls, and let's go for a walk, let's go to the movies. No, I got to do some, especially if you say, I'm going to do some things for myself. Do it another time. No, but if you say, I have a migraine, oh, I'm sorry, can I help you with anything? So never tell anybody that you don't want to do something because you're sick. Even if you're sick, find a part of your body that's not sick, and go from there and say, no, I just don't want to go. So one of the causes of health is setting emotional limits and giving people permission to not like them. That's assertiveness. Assertiveness psychology, they teach you limits, but not the second part, which is give people permission to not like it. They'll get over it. And if they care for you, they'll get over it. But what we do is we set the limits, and then when they don't like it, then they say, I'll acquiesce. So I am being told that I have 2 minutes, so I gave you 15 years of research here. So if you want to come to the lecture, it's, I think, in the Monterey room. And also, Tandava asked me I think there are a few books left. If you want to get the books, and then there's a signing at 12:30. Anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that the myth of family illnesses is a myth. It's only a propensity that you perpetuate based on following what that family is doing. Find an outlier that doesn't follow the diabetes in the family, whatever, and you're going to see that that person is different. So you only have propensities to become sick. And what I'll do in the other presentation is talk about how we learn illnesses to a certain degree, especially acquired illnesses. So anyway, a bunch of adolescents here at 90. So thank you very much, and I appreciate it.